2.5 years since we originally got this trailer showing off various characters from various different regions, and two of which particularly always stood out to me and many other players, and that is Lyney and Lynette. So why is it that these two characters stand out among all the rest is a question that probably not a single person is asking. Well, that's because they're a pair, and while we have other pairings of characters before, we have Kaya and Diluc, two adopted brothers, and we have Jean and her much shorter sister Barbara, two actually related sisters. We have an aunt and a nephew, and of course everybody's favorite, the brotherhood of short anime characters. But the single thing that makes Lyney and Lynette stand out among all these other characters that have some kind of relationship or relation or connection to each other is that Lyney and Lynette were revealed together. Now I understand that revealing two characters together may not exactly be the most special thing by itself, but I think anyone can look at this and clearly see that these two characters are themed together. Whether they're brother and sister, twins, or a couple, it doesn't matter. I think these two are clearly meant to synergize together, work together, or in my ultimate hope, be the same character in a sense. Now I already know a lot of people are going to take the stance, get it, that we have a stance switching character already. We have Child. Now unfortunately, as much as I love Child and what he's trying to do and what he actually does, he is literally the we already have stance switching at home meme. He is not doing it very well. The ranged aspect of his kit doesn't really matter. Some people out there might actually use his range gameplay, but it's not optimal to do so. And I also don't think it's not very fun and it's not very well supported. It's kind of like calling Yoimiya a charge attack character because she has a special one. So my ultimate hope for Lyney and Lynette is that these two are a true stance switching character that really give the feel of that kind of playstyle. One that you can actually use both aspects and they both perform well. I will be the first to say that there is one major problem with this kind of character in a game like Genshin Impact. The game is not very well designed for it. We have two buttons to press with cooldowns. We have our elemental skill and our elemental burst. That does not exactly leave much room to put a stance switch in there and still have a kit that can actually be used. What are you going to do if an elemental skill that switches back and forth and just have an elemental burst and an auto attack? That's not exactly the most interesting thing in the world. It could work and I'll take it over nothing, but I think there's a better way to handle it, which is to attach the switch, character switch, stance switch, whatever the hell you want to call it, to the elemental burst. Now, there's again a problem with this one as well. Cooldown. Imagining a character like this that wants to switch very often, even with the lowest cooldown we currently have of 12 seconds, that sounds like a little bit too much if you ask me. But it's also not as if that since the release of the game we haven't added new cooldown to energy cost ratios, because we have. And maybe it's time to get something as low as a 6-second cooldown 20 cost. Something like this, with an elemental burst that also causes you to switch characters but also do something that you actually want to cast. The burst would create a dynamic playstyle where you hopefully switch between characters back and forth and not just stay on one forever, but also if you want to switch around rapidly, you absolutely can. So look, if we consider that problem solved, which, I don't think that's a bad solution, but it's certainly working with what little options we have in Genshin Impact, and move on to probably something way worse, which is weapon and element. I think it would be an absolute dream to have a stance switching character that not only switches between two different characters, but each of those characters has their own element. Could that be a nightmare to balance? Absolutely. Could it be a nightmare to build teams around? Depending on what two elements they are, also absolutely. That of course could be remedied by just making them do such overwhelming raw damage and not really being compatible at reactions similar to what a unit like Raiden Shogun is, or even with the help of Dendro, it doesn't really affect what she does very much. Of course, you could also just make them Anemo and Geo, then, problem solved. However, given that this is going to happen in Fontaine, the Hydro region, I think there's a good chance, at least a healthy chance, that one of these or both are going to be Hydro, whether they're split up in multiple characters or they're the same one in my hopes and dreams. Without talking of any actual specifics of how to build this character and make it make sense, my dream, if I could just make them exactly how I want them to be, I would have them be two different elements and one of them be a ranged single target DPS and the other be a melee DPS. Basically, if you could just have Yoimiya and Ayatobi in one single character, you would have this extremely flexible character. Not only can they handle both situations in some way, shape, or form, but you would have a character that doesn't necessarily have to worry about running into elemental immunities that often because you always have a backup option. I think the more complex they would be willing to make this character, the more I would end up liking it, but the more the community would end up hating it. If you had a character that was two different elements, meaning it would be a lot harder to build a team for, and also had to equip two weapons on them, and maybe even level 2 sets of talents, that would be a nightmare in terms of PR. People would be flipping out at how expensive this character is to build, how expensive they are in general, and just how hard they are to make work. I mean, maybe, okay, let's not have it so you have to level 2 sets of talents, because that just sucks. Let's make it so when you level a talent, the other one gets leveled, which they should have done for Traveler maybe. And also, we can't forget artifacts. What if they needed 2 different sets of artifacts? They'd also need to make a way the UI could actually support one character that is effectively 2. Not that that would be an overly complicated thing to do, but it's still something that would have to be considered. But okay, let's roll this back a little bit. Let's go all the way back before I start talking about stance switch and let's talk about what's actually probably going to be the most likely outcome for these two characters. When these two were revealed, we didn't exactly have the concept of characters that were basically designed to be supports for specific characters. You know, like Goro being released alongside Ito or Sara being released alongside Raiden Shogun. And as much as it pains me to say this, that is probably what was always going to be planned for these two characters. Their design was probably made up a long ass time ago, which means the likely outcome is that one of these is a 4-star, one of them is a 5-star, and the 4-star is probably meant to support the 5-star. It'd be pretty wacky if it was the other way around and we had a 5-star support that was meant to support a 4-star DPS. It's not impossible, but you know, our history of 4-star DPS is a little bit spotty at best. Therefore, it would probably be a lot more difficult to sell the reverse to people. After all, 5-star DPS have a pretty good reputation. Even in the least interesting situation where these two, Lyney and Lynette, just end up being the next Goro and Ito or Farazan and Wanderer, whatever you want to call them, there's definitely still ways to make them interesting and not just boring. There's also things I hope they manage to avoid, such as making one of them a dedicated support for the DPS, but doesn't just end up falling short of other supports. On the other end of that, it would also be really bad if they were just horrible without the other one, just like literally unusable. The comforting thing is that that would probably be pretty hard to accomplish. I mean, after all, if either of these units ends up being good, there's a pretty high likely chance that they're going to overlap with at least some other unit in the game. We have so many playable characters now. Like, even all the dedicated supports we have right now, like Farazan may have been intended for Wanderer in most ways, shape, or form, but also works fantastically with Xiao. Could also use it with a Heizo, or if you're a lunatic, DPS Venti. The DPS have many options for supports, and the supports have many options for DPS that they can support, you know, in some cases. Maybe Goro doesn't have the most robust options, but he's got some. So let's just say Lyney and Lynette end up being the next Ito and Goro, a pair of characters that are meant to support each other. The thing about Ito and Goro, Farazan and Wanderer, or Sara and Raiden, or Shenhe and any Cryo character is that those two characters always share the same element. What if Lyney and Lynette were the first duo like this to be of different elements, but clearly meant to be together in some way, shape, or form? I think you can probably say that while Xingqiu's kit in no way says that he should be with a Pyro character, he is usually best put with Vape teams, you know, whether it be like Yoimiya, or Hu Tao, or Diluc. It's something that he feels very comfortable and natural in. And while I'm currently using Vape only as an example because we have a lot of good options for it, it's an idea that you could have a Hydra support character that also increases Pyro crit damage or something like that, or gives elemental mastery to Pyro attacks or Pyro users, something along those lines, something to set them apart from all these other dedicated supports that we have. The good news is that the wait for Lyney and Lynette is probably not going to be that long. Sumeru is almost over. We're at version 3.6 now, and I think it's pretty safe to bet that it's probably going to end at 3.8. One thing that we can probably safely say is that due to Sino and Ayaka being very early releases within their regions, that Lyney and Lynette will probably be the same. Just maybe don't make these ones standard this time. I mean, the 4-star will obviously be standardized if one is a 4-star, but if the other is a 5-star, you know, with Dia, the last time a character that had a lot of anticipation was standardized, it didn't exactly go over well. So what about you guys? Are you excited for Lyney and Lynette, aside from, you know, just Lynette appears to be a cat girl, and that clearly gets people very excited. And, you know, I'm more interested in about what you think about their kit and what kind of implications that would have. You know, maybe you want the same kind of thing I want, or maybe you thought of something completely different, some interesting way to build these characters and make them reliant on each other without making it way too restrictive. Regardless of what it is, I'd like to hear it. So thank you to my members and my patrons. Thank you to you for watching. I can't wait for Fontaine in the land of Hydro. I'll see you in the next one.
Attaboy!